Now listen to these numbers. In the 40 years prior to 1965, we had an average of 178,000 immigrants per year. Now I call that the golden era of immigration because I can find no time in history when immigrants were so welcomed, when they assimilated so quickly, or when they did so well. Because we had lower immigration, we had a tighter labor market, which means that we had the pressure on more capital investment, we had pressure for higher productivity and higher wages. And because of that, we became a middle-class society during that golden era of immigration. And what's really wonderful about the golden era of immigration is that it's the only time in American history that there was a sustained, significant increase in the income of black Americans, and that increase was even faster than the increase for white Americans. Tight labor markets, the best friend that any worker ever had. But in 1965, Congress changed the immigration law and inadvertently sent the numbers skyrocketing. Between 1965 and 1989, we averaged more than 500,000 immigrants a year. Nearly every aspect of American society has changed because of that rapid increase. The polls show us that between 70 and 80% of Americans say immigration ought to be cut. And yet, Americans have not really spoken out that much about legal immigration. And I think the reason is because most of us have immigrant friends. We don't want to talk about things that would hurt the feelings of our immigrant friends. And we certainly would not want to say anything or do anything that would bring hostility toward the foreign-born among us. I'm about to show you some charts that should be the centerpiece of any discussion on immigration. No congressional action should occur without consulting these charts. In 1970, we had 203 million people in this country. Those people will be represented below this chart. What this chart shows you, what this green shows you, is the growth in the U.S. population since 1970. In 1973, the American people moved to a below replacement level fertility. That means that we have on average fewer than 2.1 children per woman. At below replacement fertility, we will eventually stabilize our population along with all the rest of the advanced nations of the world. But we still had growth. This is the growth of births over deaths. And the reason is that the baby boomers, and I'm at the first of that bulge, we had to move through our childbearing years. So even though we had small families, there were so many of us that we kept growing. Demographers have shown us what will happen to the 1970 stock population throughout the next 50 years. And that is, they took the people who were here in 1970, subtracted the deaths of those people, added their descendants, and subtracted the deaths of their descendants. And they found that this is what will happen. Now, as you can see, the population by right now is very slowly growing. In the next 5 years, it's going to stop growing. It'll grow a little bit more with the baby boom echo. And then it reaches a peak of 247 million in the year 2030. This is not a zero immigration level, however. This is replacement level immigration. That is, replacement level fertility is when you have the same number of people being born as are dying each year. Replacement level immigration is when you have the same number of people coming in as leave each year. Right now, about 200,000 Americans leave the country permanently each year. This is what the Census Bureau tells us actually happened in the last 25 years. Now, as you can see, our population growth has doubled over what it otherwise would have. This red represents every immigrant who came since 1970, plus their descendants, minus the deaths of both groups. There's been as much population growth from immigration as from the natural growth from the 1970 stock population. Now, that has meant that we have had to double all of the additional infrastructure expenditures we've had in this country. We've had to build twice as many schools, twice as many sewage treatment plants. We've had to build twice as many roads and streets. All of the needs of this country the additional needs of this country have doubled because of this radical new immigration policy of the United States government. In California, the State Department of Education has found that they have to build a new school every single day of the year in perpetuity, as long as the current immigration continues at this level, just to keep up with the children being added by immigration. As you can see, the numbers go completely off the charts. The Census Bureau tells us that this will be our future if immigration continues at today's rates. And this is what we're bequeathing to our children and our grandchildren by the middle of the next century. This is not conjecture. This is not subjective. This is not what might be. This is what will be if Congress refuses to lower immigration to something like a traditional level. There are some Americans who have very sincere feelings that we have to bring in immigrants in order to show our concern for the third world. Is immigration an effective tool? In this illustration, I use this gumball that's representing about 1 million people. Now, 1 million people is about what we take in a year in immigrants. This is not a small number because remember, this one gumball worth of immigration is driving every bit of this red. And each year in our magnanimity, we try to rescue about this number from third world poverty. But how many people in the world are equally deserving of this kind of humanitarian concern on our part? Well, you got to have some kind of benchmark, and I use Mexico. 25% of the immigrants in the 1980s came from Mexico. 4,600 million people. 4.6 billion people in the world are more impoverished than the average Mexican. If immigration is a policy to help the people of the third world, I want you to watch very closely. Don't miss this, because I want you to watch to see how much the third world changes each year when we take the million people out of it. You see, there can never be any hope for the people in the third world except here where they live. Most of these people, 99.whatever% of these people can never leave. They're stuck where they are. They have to bloom where they're planted. If we care about these people, we have to figure out ways to help them here. Because we can do this kind of thing forever, but we won't make any difference in the world. There are many ways that Americans can help third world nations, but immigration is not one of them. The fact is that last year we took about 1 million people. But last year the third world added births over deaths, another 80 million people into the impoverished portions of the world. And this year we'll take 1 million people. And this year, the third will add more than 80 million more people. And next year, if the U.S. government insists on bringing this exorbitant, non-traditional level of immigration and brings another 1 million people, these people will still add another more than 80 million people. Now, you may live in a community that's little affected by immigration, but believe me, if this growth happens, there isn't a community in America that is assured of escaping the ravages that's now hitting California. And we must make decisions now for our children's and our grandchildren's future. If we allow this to happen, that future will be foreclosed. Now, what can we do? It's very simple. Congress merely has to lower the number back to where it was in 1965.